Hello everyone, my name is Griffin the Hansen. If you're on this channel, you've probably seen some of the animated films I've directed, but I also run an organization I founded called the Animation Education Association. Our goal is to install historical markers across the country for animated filmmakers. Well, we're also going to try something new, recording interviews with notable animated filmmakers for your listening pleasure. These conversations will be uploaded here to YouTube, where they'll always be available for free. Think of this as a spiritual successor to my Cartoons vs. Cancer and Cartoons vs. COVID series, but with more of a focus on the artists' lives and creative process. Now, what better way to start this new series off than a conversation with legendary animated filmmaker Caroline Leaf? I hope you enjoy this interview, and for more like this, you can watch episodes of Cartoons vs. Cancer in the description below, and be sure to subscribe for our next interview. You and I are both Boston folks, but you weren't born in Boston. You're from Washington. What was your childhood like there?
No, I grew up in Boston. I grew
Did
up
you grow up
in
in Boston?
Winchester, a suburb of Boston. Yeah, I was born in Seattle because my parents come from there.
Really?
And yeah, yeah.
So what was the point of the move then? I mean, why were they even in Seattle?
Oh, my father's parents were Russian Jews who left during the revolution and came via Japan. So they came to the west coast of the US
Hmm.
when they arrived. And I don't know, my mother, it's complicated with my mother's family, but they both grew up in Seattle.
Hmm.
Um,
Did they come in as Leaf? Was it spelt Leaf like a tree back then?
no, it was one of those Ellis Island stories.
Oh, really?
It was Lifshitz. Thank goodness it got changed.
We won't call you that. I don't want to be rude. So Lifshitz got turned into Leaf. I think that's
Yeah,
probably apt.
good, good. By an immigration officer.
Yeah. So you were in Winchester, and what was childhood like in Boston there? I mean, were you a very artsy kid? Did you find yourself the only person in your school who was really interested in the arts, or were your parents very encouraging of it?
I don't connect much of my childhood with art.
Mhm.
Um, no, and living in suburbs, I didn't see much. We didn't go often into the city, but my parents were always encouraging. And my father was a scientist. He never understood that an artist has to work to produce something. He it was only at the end of his life that he said I did good.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah,
What did your mother do in Boston?
she was a housewife. She brought us up, and then she went back to school to Wellesley and became a nurse. She was a visiting nurse.
Oh, really? Was it at the Newton Wellesley Hospital?
Oh, did you grow up in Newton?
I was born at the Newton Wellesley Hospital. Yeah, I was.
Ah,
Yeah,
ah.
but
Um,
probably after her time. I was born in 2000, so
yeah. No, I think she was in Arlington,
oh yeah,
Winchester, Belmont. I don't know, that sort of area.
yeah, that's sort of it. So you go to Radcliffe, and at the time, if I understand, it was an all girls school.
Yeah, we thought we were really superior to Harvard because it was such a select, small school.
That's true.
We had classes, everything was shared with Harvard, but the admissions was separate. The degree wasn't separate, I don't think. Classes were shared, the living quarters were separate. And now I know the dorms are women are and men are, it's mixed.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't know about admissions now. Does Radcliffe really not exist?
I I don't want to be too speculative because I don't know the exact answer, but I think that Radcliffe is now part of Harvard, but I don't think that it like doesn't exist or anything. I think it's just part of Harvard now.
Well, I used to be interested in the Radcliffe Institute, and that was for graduate studies for women. And and I know that it became subsumed by Harvard, and now it's not even the Radcliffe Institute.
Oh,
Maybe
really?
it's the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. Um, and men get fellowships there as well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
When you were, when you were going to school there, Did you go to like Isabella Gardner or the Museum of Fine Arts very often?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Did you find yourself in the public gardens sketching little ducks or anything?
No.
No. Only. The thing that's interesting to me is again because this might be difficult for a modern day person to understand, but again, at the time, Radcliffe and Harvard were different schools. Now, as best I understand it, you took classes at Harvard for animation, and your teacher, uh, or perhaps it was Albert Alcalay at Radcliffe who recommended Derek Lamb, or was it the other way around?
So I was at Radcliffe from 64 to 68, and Harvard was just, so we were sharing classes, we took classes at Harvard, and Alcalay was a graphics art teacher, and um, Derek Lamb was an animation instructor. Harvard, well, I think in general, liberal arts colleges in those years were starting to teach film.
Mhm.
And Harvard didn't want, well, they were scared of studio classes, I think, because they weren't academic enough.
Right.
And I don't know how they chose Derek Lamb, but it might have been through John Hubley that they asked who might teach an animation course. And he said he looked to the film board in Canada,
Mhm.
and somehow Derek's name came up. Derek then asked, I mean, this is the story I've heard. Then Derek asked Norman McLaren, how should I teach animation to these Harvard students? They don't know how to draw. It's open to, MIT students. Um, you know, and McLaren said, teach the movement.
Hmm.
And that really fit in with, that the animation class was one room. It was 1 year in the basement of the Carpenter Center that had just been finished by, I guess, Gropius was the designer. So it was very Bauhaus oriented, and Bauhaus suited Harvard's idea of, we don't want free expression. We want, like the structure should show, and the look of something depends on what its structure is and all that sort of stuff. Albert Alcalay taught that sort of way, although his work itself wasn't that way. And Derek taught us to make movement. So since we couldn't draw, people were mostly pixelating,
Mhm.
or they were, I was moving quarters around, trying to make an
Gotcha.
expressive movement with a quarter or a dime. And yeah, so that's how it went.
Now you move into this world of people like Norm McLaren and Derek Lamb and so on and so forth. Did you have a relationship with animation before that? Did you grow up interested in, back then it was like just Disney and Warner. There wasn't too much, Oscar Fishinger you could just see in the Combat Zone or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. No, I didn't. I didn't like Disney, and I still don't particularly care for Disney. So I didn't know anything about animation. And when I was in my senior year, and I thought, let me have some fun. I want to take a film course, and I really didn't know documentary animation, what I would do. I just sort of chose the animation because it seemed less people oriented, maybe. I don't even know why. So I kind of fell into it.
I would say that it was worth it then to some degree.
Yes,
It wasn't a
yes,
bad idea.
yes.
So you get into these classes, and it's my understanding that you spend some time in Gloucester, in Gloucester, Massachusetts, at this beach house with your family, and something there really seems to inspire you, right?
Yeah. The art history classes that I took at Harvard petrified me to actually do anything myself, because they were always describing the perfect Raphael, the
Yeah.
triangle, the Madonna and Child, and I never got it really. And a blank piece of paper scared me. So I was happy making movement with quarters, but at some point I thought I could get more expression if I could draw. And I don't know, sand, the beach sand there was so fine. Um, I thought, well, a pile of sand, I could draw, roughly. with the sand, and I was comfortable with it because no one had done it before. So there wasn't anybody to compare myself to
Yeah.
or tell me what's the best way to do it. I didn't feel inadequate in any way. And the sand limited what I could achieve because I just had black and white. And eventually I learned how to make shading, but the images are quite crude. So I didn't need to feel that I couldn't, not being able to draw
Mhm.
the way you're supposed to be able to draw wasn't an issue with the sand.
Do you remember walking into class on that first day with a mason jar of sand or something, and your teacher looking at you like you had five heads, or what?
I don't actually remember the beginning of it, but I do remember they didn't think too much of it until I started to produce images. So I was put the camera, the only room we had was painted black and it had little cine cameras nailed to the wall and light boxes underneath. And I was put in a corner because I was spending a lot of time there. And in my student films, Sander, Peter, and the Wolf, you can see the lights in the room are going on and off
Yeah.
as the light level changes in the film. That's because no one was really paying too much attention to what I did. But when the film was finished, it got attention.
Hmm.
Yeah.
When you are working on these films, and I don't want to jump too forward, but when you're working on these films, I'm a filmmaker myself, but I have a team of people. And of course, I review the work and I work very closely with them. But you yourself are personally involved with every single frame of something like sand or the street or so on and so forth because you're etching it or you're forming it. Do you feel a connection, a personal connection to every single frame of your film in a way that you think other filmmakers don't?
Well, it's true. I know that I made each frame, and it sounds like you don't feel connected in that way.
Well, I
Um,
can't look at a frame and say to myself, "Oh, I remember how I was hunched over the light box that day." I remember having to wipe the sweat off of my head because of that. But do you sort of feel that way when you watch some of your films?
no, I don't think about it being a lot of sweat
Oh,
and blood and
good.
tears. I do think, in Montreal, it was really nice to know that I had this warm and brightly lit camera stand room to go to in the dead of freezing winter. And then eventually I got restless being in that darkened room, and wanted to leave it. But no, I don't remember the moments of making my film as I mean, certainly there was a lot of discipline
Mhm.
to come. Mainly the discipline was to come each day and start picking up where I left off, getting up to
Yeah.
speed immediately so I wasn't making mistakes in the movement because it was continuous movement. Yeah.
Well, when you did make a mistake, because your films are so organic, was it something that you would kick yourself over, or would you say, "Great, now I have a new avenue to explore"?
Well, because I was telling a story, the story was the most important thing, keeping to the story. So
Right.
if I made a mistake, well, I had to live with mistakes. I couldn't reshoot anything.
Yeah.
And I usually didn't, no, I knew when I was, if my image didn't look quite right, I knew I was getting bored and
Yeah.
something would go wrong. So I needed to pay attention that it looked right. But I would shoot for a few weeks before I'd send it into the lab to get the film processed. So I might not realize I'd made a mistake.
Hmm.
There are mistakes in my films and they're fine.
Do
They're
you watch
fine.
your
They're part of the organic nature of my films as you
Yeah.
describe it.
So you talked about Montreal, and before you went to Montreal, you spent some time in Mexico. But it's my understanding that instead of actually learning how to speak Spanish, you spent the entire time painting.
How do you know that I was in Mexico? Where did you
I
find that?
I do some research. I'm not just here to, just not here to just sort of pat you on the back. I know my stuff.
I'm amazed. I hardly ever think of my time in Mexico. I spent a summer there.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, I was drawing. I
Nice.
was drawing.
When most people don't remember their time in Mexico, it's because they were partying. So I'm glad that it was because you were you were drawing. Now, when you think about your time in Mexico, you are now spending time because, of course, after that you go to Montreal. You're now spending time in Mexico, in America, in Canada as well. So, do you feel that your time in Mexico and, of course, your childhood and pretty much your entire life in America really informed how you were going to view the culture when you got to Canada?
I didn't give it a thought.
Until now, of course.
Yes.
So
But
you
you know, when I left Canada, I was used to by then the government support that isn't in the States. And I remember quite clearly, I didn't feel comfortable in the States. I didn't know how everything was oriented towards businesses, and I didn't know how that worked. You know, I'd been a government employee in Canada at the film board. Um, and that's partly why I came to England. So
well,
I didn't feel I was fitting back into the US.
yeah.
Although that still feels like the place I know best because it's where I grew up. I know how things work there, I think.
Well, then let's get into that because I'd love to talk a little bit about Canada now. So you're in school, you're at Radcliffe, at Harvard, you're making things like Sand or Peter and the Wolf, and then how does a then what 20 some year old young woman go from just a college student to getting to work at the Film Board of Canada?
Well, that had something to do with my student film getting finished. It had something to do with Derek Lamb having come from the film board, although he's British, but he worked at the film board. So he introduced me to McLaren and people like that. And I went up there with my little film and showed it to them, and it got a good reaction. And then I asked for a job, and then I waited a year or two, and then I got a call saying it was from the French animation saying we have a series of films that we're making, and we think your sand animation would be good. Would you come?
Is it true that Norm McLaren came to your desk once and saw what you were doing and said, "I never thought of that. That's genius."
I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
Um, Now, so you're at the National Film Board of Canada, and for those who don't know, what is different about how Canada works with film production versus, let's say, here in the ever lovable United States?
Hmm. Canada has a big problem with its US neighbor, and it always has, I think. And though the film board was started during World War II to make publicity for the war effort, to get Canada behind the British war effort,
Mhm.
the film board and generally Canadian government subsidized film was the government subsidized film in order to make Canadian productions that were really Canadian because they wanted their population that was wide, this huge country. Um, they wanted people to feel Canadian, and they wanted people to look at Canadian films, not American films.
Mhm.
So it was a way of building the nation. It was the reason why Canada put money into film. And the film board, I don't know, there was always an argument because amongst us, because one nice thing about working at the film board was we were supposed to be an educational institution. We weren't there was fiction film being made, but our films were meant to be Canadian. And of course, as an American coming in, well, I came in years when there were a lot of international animators coming. But, like my first film was an Inuit
Yeah.
Eskimo Legend, Canadian. And that happened because the film board and the CBC got broadcast rights in the Arctic with the condition that they showed a certain amount of native content. And of course, there weren't any Inuit animators or artists or filmmakers at that time. There were artists, but there weren't filmmakers at the time. So my film was made with money with that in mind. My second film, The Street, was based on a story by Richler, Canadian author that was well known at the time. I became Canadian, and then my films naturally were Canadian content because I was a Canadian. So it got easier for me, and my choices were wider as time passed. But it was nice that we weren't making films that were meant to be mainstream. We were making them for specialized audiences. Mm-hmm. So like the Street was maybe made for, I don't know, Canadian high school students or, kids learning about Canadian literature. I remember there was one time when there was a tax put on cinema tickets, mm-hmm. and that tax paid for, I think it paid for film board production, or maybe it paid for Canadian films to get into cinemas, because of course it was hard work for these films to be seen by a specialized audience. Mm-hmm. I mean, for a general audience, much. But generally, we found that if people were exposed to our films, they liked our films. Yeah. You might have grown up in with film board films that were from the science unit. Well, I grew up with. I saw films that were film board films in my science physics classes, for example.
That's true. We didn't have that where I lived in New Hampshire, but if you wanted to see a National Film Board film, they used to play them on Cartoon Network as part of a block called, I think it was Ode to Canada was what it was called. It was mostly like The Cat Came Back or like comedic stuff like that. But it sort of opened my eyes to this really interesting thing about government-funded films in Canada, which of course we don't have here in the United States, or at least not to the effect that they do in Canada. You are a American, as you said, but you became Canadian. Norm Maclaren was from Scotland, but he moved to Canada, of course, and had quite a prosperous career. Do you think that the National Film Board of Canada and its success, and I do think that it's a great success, do you think that its success came from bringing people from different countries to open a new perspective to Canadian ideas and stories?
Yeah, I think it was helped a lot by the skilled people they brought in. Mm-hmm. It was always a bit strange to me. Canadians themselves didn't know the film board as well as it was known internationally. Mm-hmm. I found that in the years when I had made films and started to be asked to travel with them and screen them. And actually, I didn't ever travel in Canada showing my films.
I know that a lot of schools in Canada would be able to, you talk about science class, but even in history class, it's something they'd be able to rent the films. Did you ever hear from people who'd watched your film, like The Eskimo and the Goose, for instance, in their school or something? Did you ever get like letters from people or anything?
No. Well, I don't remember.
They were addressed to someone else. They were given to the sales department got them all. You didn't get anything.
No, I was once contacted by an Indian group, I think in Oregon. They were American. They wanted me to give a sand workshop, but they told me, you shouldn't have made that film. You should have that film belongs to the people, the Inuit people. And I did change the story when I made it quite a bit, mm-hmm. not realizing what I was doing. So it's more an adaptation. That's the only time I remember someone contacting me about that film.
When you were working at the National Film Board of Canada, I think of a animation studio, and you think of like Willy Wonka's factory, crazy Post-its on the walls and silly pictures and all this stuff. But this is a government agency. So what was day-to-day life like at the government-funded animation studio?
Well, The building was in the outskirts of the city.
Mm.
It was hard if you didn't have a car to get there. It was sort of in the area where car dealerships were. I mean, it was not a pleasant neighborhood,
Yeah.
but they had cheap water rates. And so the lab needed that. And that's why they put the building there, I think. People worked from 9 to 5. People on staff were permanent. So you were working, I mean, there were so many people. The animation studios, there were two of them, French and English.
Right.
And they were so large, you always found the people that you were comfortable with, who liked your films and you liked theirs. But there were clearly people that were kind of like dead wood, you know? I mean, they shouldn't have been making films and drawing a salary, but they were employees. And then another thing about it was that because it was a secure job, because it was a paid government employee job, um, the private industry, filmmakers, which was small and struggling, often resented the film board.
Really?
Although they also, yeah, yeah, it looked like a cushy place to be. And there was sometimes interference in the content. You know, if I had wanted to be wildly experimental or say something awful about the Queen, that probably couldn't have made a film there.
Right.
So there was some censorship. I was very lucky that I wanted to do something that they liked.
Hmm.
You know, I didn't run into any of those problems.
So the film board is, of course, this government entity, and you, Caroline Leaf, are of course an individual. When you have something like The Street or the Eskimo Marry the Goose, is it something where when the film itself receives a lot of love and attention, especially in the case of something like The Street, which is incredibly renowned, do you, the individual, receive a lot of accolades and sort of recognition for it? Or have you found that the government agency itself is what's getting a lot of the flowers, if you will?
No, I think I got a lot of attention.
Mhm.
Yeah. And at the film board, the producers, I think the American system sort of favors producers. Like at the Academy Awards, often it's the producer that's given the award, right?
Yeah.
Well, the film board respected the directors, and maybe because money, I don't know, I never had the experience of a producer trying to tell me what should be in my content or anything that I should do. Producers were very much in the background. Directors were foreground.
So if that's the case, you talked a little bit about censorship before. Would it be a situation where, not that you would, but if a director were to make something that was quite controversial, would they bring it to the producer as a completed product and then maybe have it cut down a little bit, or are producers involved early in the process to make sure that everything was agreeable?
Oh no, there was quite a rigorous process of a director getting an idea, going through a program committee, having to deal with everybody's comments, and at different points along the way, a producer might come in and help you with that. Yeah.
What was your relationship like with some of the producers that you worked with?
You know, I was pretty much left alone. I don't remember much contact with my producers
Mhm.
at all. Um, no, I don't have a lot to say about that. It, it,
Good.
it was it was good.
If you think about it, it would be bad if you had a lot to say about it because that would mean that you were always you may go explain with them. So you're of course known for working in sand animation. I want to push back a little bit on that because you made some films with sand animation, of course, but you also have a lot of terrific films that are made with techniques like scratching onto film or also to be painting on the actual a piece of glass and then showing the paint evolve. And I wonder if I couldn't just read to you a quote that somebody said about you. This was in a screening room interview that you did as a young woman at, I think you were still at the NFB at the time. An interview in which you're wearing maybe the greatest outfit ever. You got this great necklace on, and your hair is brilliant. The host said, and this is a bit of a paraphrase, that you, like few other figures in the history of animation, will be known for having innovated in the medium of sand. But again, you've worked in a lot of mediums that aren't sand. Do you feel like you are sort of boxed in a little bit and only thought of as an artist who innovated in sand? Or do you think that you you don't want to be just qualified as the quote unquote sand lady?
I hadn't noticed that I was particularly the sand lady. Well, the wet paint on glass evolved when I wanted to work with color and couldn't manage to work with colored sand,
Mhm.
keep all those piles of colors separate. So I connect those two in my mind.
Hmm.
They're they're very similar to me, because the work method is the same. And I I I am working with either sand or paint. The smaller I could work, the less material there was to move around, the faster I could work. And speed was always really important to me because I I think what I was good at was creating motion, and I was imagining the motion. And ideally I would have liked to have made my animation happen as I was imagining the motion. And so I came to scratching because it seemed like such a quick way to animate
Mhm.
and get motion. And I saw McLaren and other people at the film board scratching on film. Len Lai was a filmmaker I liked a lot.
Yeah.
Um, and and then because I had this story that I'd evolved, which was the Two Sisters film, and it was too complicated a story to scratch tiny little 16 millimeter images or even 35. So I scratched quite large frames, IMAX frames. So it all seems kind of like it all flows together to me in my mind. It all seems, well, the sand and the paint were direct animation. I couldn't go back and make changes. I was shooting it and it was finished and wiped out when I finished a frame.
Mhm.
With the scratching, there was a trail. I could make changes. So that was a huge difference.
I have to apologize to some degree. I think I might have misspoke there. It isn't that I think that you're quote unquote just the sand lady or anything like that, but that does seem to be a through line that a lot of people can't mention Caroline Leaf and sand animation without them being in the same breath. Do you think that it's something that you're very proud of to have brought sand animation into the forefront of a lot of artists' minds?
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I Here in London, I until a few years ago, I was giving the first year students at the National Film School where I teach, I gave them a sand animation workshop for 2 weeks. And some of them hated to get their hands dirty, and they would use brushes like this pencil, tiny little two bristle brushes, and move the grains of sand around. But sand is amazingly graphic, and there was always an interesting result. They would see it too, even though they might not be able to animate as finely tuned as they're used to with their computers or something. So I'm proud of sand animation.
Well, and you, of course, have done so much to push it forward. Sand, of course, is a part of nature, and your name is Leaf, after all. There seems to be an indelible link between Caroline Leaf, the artist, and nature. I mean, not only do you use natural materials in your work, but you make films about animals, about indigenous culture, so on and so forth. Do you feel like you have a connection, a deeper connection between yourself and nature in either your work or your life?
Well, I've always lived in the city, so I'm not really like I've never slept outdoors.
Well, I wouldn't recommend it. You get a
You
stuffy
wouldn't.
nose when you wake up. You're a bit more of a city mouse, is what you're saying.
Yes, but I always like getting out into nature. I, you know, yesterday I was out sketching in nature, and that's about the best thing I can think of doing. And I like drawing trees. I'm so proud that I've learned how to draw trees, and that has something to do with leaf, maybe.
Okay. Better that than leave shits, I suppose. So that's interesting. So you do feel to some degree, even if you'd qualify yourself as more of a city person, that you do feel a great sort of symbiotic relationship with nature, and you do feel very relaxed when you're in it.
Yeah, but I would say as an animator, I realized, I've said that I like making movement, and I kind of am known also for making these camera pans or
Mhm.
more to change from one place to another. And to do those things, I needed to be indoors. So I think after my first films, which were stories of the outdoors, I I haven't made that many films, but they're all indoors because, to create motion, you need something in front and something behind. And it's the relative motion in relation to the edges of your frame that tell you about the movement.
Do you see then your films in a way as a reflection of you or of the values that you have?
Yes, I think they are because I know that I've chosen stories that seemed important to me, or I'd get bored. I mean, why spend 2 years working on a story that doesn't have much meat on its bones?
Right.
Um, and the more I work, I'm painting now, but I'm realizing the the structure and the composition, and it kind of goes back to Bauhaus things, the materials I use and what I can do that's structural with the materials seems to be the most interesting and important thing to me.
Mhm.
So I'd say that's in my films too. So that has to be me because now no one's asking me to do anything. I'm doing what I want to do, and this is what's coming out.
Well, and that's something that I think is really that really leads into the fact that you also are very involved with the music in your films, right?
Well, there almost is no music in my films because because when I'm animating, I'm hearing sound effects and ambience because I'm in spaces. And um, my film Two Sisters is the first film where I worked with the composer, and she was very good at giving me large tones, and that was not diegetic sound, but it didn't because the movement is important, and I want you to feel the movement. I feel music forces you into a rhythm, and my films are more erratic in storytelling than rhythmic. So I don't have music in my films usually.
Mhm. The another big component of the work, speaking of course, about these beautiful camera movements, is the colors that you use. And your films are very, I don't think muted is the word, but they're very reserved in the way that they use color. Of course, your early films could really not use color too much because they were just sand on light boxes. But when you get to something like Two Sisters or The Streets, I think of that like bright atomic green in Two
Oh,
Sisters. It's so impactful on the audience. How does color come into how you go about creating a scene?
well, that has to do with the material that I'm using. But I think my my middle films, the paint on glass films, look muted because I came out of black and white, and I never make big leaps and radical changes. I'm always kind of consistent and just push forward a little bit in one direction. Um, so I wasn't using bright colors. And also, because of the way I was working, the colors, pushing things around with your fingers,
Yeah.
the black would mix with the red and it would give a soft edge. And so it was easier to work with soft edges than hard edges between two bright colors. So that's why they look kind of muted. And then the green, that acid green that's in the Two Sisters film, happened because of the way the color is laid down in color film.
Mhm.
You have a red layer, a blue layer, and a yellow layer, and then you have the base of the film. And if I scratched lightly, I was taking off the red layer, so you have blue and yellow left, and that makes green. And that's what caused the green in that film.
Mhm.
And when I scratched down to the white base, then it was white. So those films were exposed to be black, and the colors came because of the nature of color film, Kodak color film.
So, if that's the case, you really seem like an artist who is informed a lot by story and a lot by material. If you were to come up with a new idea for a film, for instance, do you come up with the idea for the narrative at the same time that you come up with the idea for what material you'll use to show it to the audience?
Well, I'm not making films right now, so I don't know how I
We
would.
hope, we can hope.
But I, I, yes, as I was like for Two Sisters, as I was adapting and writing the story, I was also experimenting with the technique to see what scratching on color film, black color film would give me.
Mhm.
And it affected the storytelling.
When you came up with the idea for Two Sisters, part of the development process for the story was coming up with how you could show it to the audience on the screen, not just the literal narrative, but what could visually be portrayed.
Yeah, and I knew that I didn't want to do another paint on glass. I knew that I wanted at that point to scratch on film. But for example, that the sister who's been cooped up inside in the dark breaks out, goes outdoors into the sunlight, and and everything goes white. That came from the nature of scratching on the film. I probably wouldn't have thought of that in the story as something that happened to show her freedom, except that I had the black and the white in the film emulsion to
Mhm.
play with.
So to go back to something that you just mentioned a minute ago, you aren't making films anymore. Although, if you're ever interested, my studio is always hiring, and you have quite a good resume. But seriously, the fact that you haven't made a film now in, I suppose, about 15 years, because I think it was 2008, was the slavery film.
Yeah, something like that, or 2012 maybe, or yeah,
Well,
something like that.
now now you're working in oil paintings, which are beautiful. Do you, and you're teaching as well in London, do you look at your decision to leave the motion pictures and go to painting, canvas work, as something that is an extension of your film career, or do you see it as a new artistic avenue?
I When I made the break, it was really a break.
Hmm.
I felt that I was doing something really different. And it's only with time that I have realized my work method is quite a bit the same. I'm
Mhm.
very slow. It takes me a long time. It's a discipline and some of the same interests, like I mentioned before about structure and what the materials can do. Those are there. And I struggle still with storytelling, which in my painting would be being representational or being abstract, you know, and I've gone towards abstract, and it feels like a relief to not be trying to tell a story. Like you're very story oriented, I'd say, and I'm not so much. I use that as a useful structure in my film days.
Well, in fairness, you are a substantially better filmmaker than I
Oh no, I really liked your Red Riding Hood story.
am. Thank you
The
very
only
much.
thing I would say about it was that I got a little anxious. What I didn't know that it was satire. I wasn't sure about the satire element.
I promise this is not, I'm not going to start advertising protein powder as part of this podcast. I'm not that sort of guy. So you are, like you said, you've sort of broken with your quote unquote film side and the canvas side, the painting side. But you've gone on to have this, these great retrospectives held. You won the Winsor McKay Award a number of years ago, and you are incredibly respected in the animation industry. When you look at the animation industry today, and I don't know how active you are in watching new films or TV shows or anything like that, do you see any work that you or perhaps some of your contemporaries you think are still influencing modern animators?
Uh, this is a good question, and I'm not staying enough on top of things to
Go
know.
wherever you want. Go wherever you want.
No, I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Do you think that the content of your films is what might inspire people the most, or do you think that it's the idea of what you did, of reaching out into different mediums, of exploring new paths?
Well, I think people are moved emotionally by the stories, and I purposely made them seductive because I wanted to reach people emotionally. But I think people are reacting also to the spontaneity of working under the camera
Mhm.
or seeing the little scratch marks. They feel that I'm there, and that maybe is what is interesting because animation has moved more towards live action in the mainstream, I'd say, or blending with live action, and you don't feel the person there. And like it's always interesting to be out on the street and see someone doing a painting.
Mhm.
People watch artists working. So I think they feel that I'm there because they see all these little strokes and things are moving and you feel the presence of the artist, I guess.
That's true. I suppose what you're saying is that in a world now that we live in where animators are trying so hard to replicate real life, it's people like yourself who put so much of their own fingerprints in the work that that you find the most interesting.
Yeah. And I think some other people react to that.
Mhm. Isn't that interesting? We've sort of reached, if you will, a circle because we talked at the beginning about how you didn't much care for Disney films. And even in the 40s, they were trying so hard to replicate how deers actually walk or or something like that, elephants, Dumbo, whatever.
Yeah.
And now, nearly 100 years later, it's still filmmakers like yourself or even back in Disney's day, like Oscar Fishinger, Stan Breckenridge, someone like that, who's seeming to also have a very lasting impact.
Among a smaller group of people,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, there are those people that react to that.
In that regard, then, when somebody comes across a Caroline Leaf film, what would you want them to take away from it?
Um, well, I, I guess I'd like them to be moved by something and not just moved by the story, but by how the thing was done, which might seem unusual to them. It's a good question. I'm not sure
Well,
how to answer it.
that's it. That's those are all the questions I have. The last thing I'll have to ask then is I know that you still spend a lot of time in Gloucester. Gloucester. Do you have any recommendations for good place to get lobster rolls when you're in Gloucester?
Actually, I had a good lobster roll, but my friends took me there and I don't remember the place. I mean,
They could have
I
a
would
free
recognize
advertisement.
it. It was on the road to Rockport,
The road
but
to
I don't know the name.
And the road to Rockport is paved with good intentions, as we know.
Hello everyone, my name is Griffin the Hansen. If you're on this channel, you've probably seen some of the animated films I've directed, but I also run an organization I founded called the Animation Education Association. Our goal is to install historical markers across the country for animated filmmakers. Well, we're also going to try something new, recording interviews with notable animated filmmakers for your listening pleasure.